There is a moment, and you have lived it more than once, where you are standing in front of the mirror, or sitting alone at some late hour, or lying in bed staring at the ceiling that holds no answers, and something inside you makes a quiet, almost sacred decision. You feel it, a resolve, a clarity that arrives without warning, clean and certain like cold water. You think, this time is different. This time I will actually follow through. This time I will wake up earlier, pray properly, stop wasting my hours, stop lying to myself, stop choosing the easier, softer, lesser version of everything. You feel the weight of the promise pressing against your chest like something real. And for a moment, sometimes a few hours, sometimes a few days, you almost believe yourself. And then something happens. Not a catastrophe, not a failure so dramatic it would at least explain itself. Something smaller, something almost embarrassing in how small it is. You sleep through your alarm once, you skip one prayer, and then find yourself skipping the next one without the same guilt. You open your phone when you said you wouldn't. You eat what you said you wouldn't. You speak the way you swore you no longer would. And what is worse than breaking the promise is what follows. The quiet, almost mechanical way you return to being the person you were trying to escape. As if the promise never happened. As if that moment of clarity was not real. As if you imagined the whole thing. And you are left with one question. What happened? Not in the philosophical sense, not as a spiritual exercise. You genuinely want to know. You are sitting with the wreckage of another attempt at becoming someone better, and you want someone to explain to you what is actually going on inside you, because you have tried logic, you have tried motivation, you have made charts and lists and schedules and intentions, and none of it holds. The structure collapses, the resolution dissolves, and you are tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes, but the tired that comes from fighting something inside yourself that you cannot name and cannot see and cannot locate, but can absolutely, unmistakably feel. So let me tell you what is actually happening. But first, I need you to understand something that most people never stop long enough to consider. You have been treating this problem as if it is a problem of knowledge. As if the reason you keep failing to become better is because you do not know the right strategy, or the right schedule, or the right approach. You have been treating this as a problem that lives in your head, something that can be solved with enough information, enough planning, enough willpower applied at the right angle. It is not. What you are dealing with does not live in your head. It lives somewhere older than thought, deeper than intention. It runs on its own logic, follows its own gravity, serves its own interests. And it has been running this show quietly, efficiently, almost invisibly, for most of your life. The scholars of the inner life had a name for it. They called it the Nafs. And I want to be careful here, because the word Nafs has been flattened and simplified into something almost useless in most modern conversations. People hear it and think desires, temptations, the part of you that wants to do bad things. But that is not what it is. Or rather, that is only the smallest surface of what it is. The Nafs is not just your desire for food or pleasure or comfort. It is something more fundamental than any of those. It is the organizing principle of your self-preservation. It is the system inside you that has been monitoring every experience since you were old enough to feel pain and pleasure, cataloging what hurts and what helps, building an architecture of avoidance and pursuit that operates completely below the level of your conscious decision-making. It is, in the most precise sense, a survival intelligence. And the problem, the deep or uncomfortable, slightly terrifying problem, is that your Nafs has learned through years and years of accumulated experience that staying the same is safe, that the familiar, even when it is painful, is predictable, that change, real change, the kind you keep promising yourself, is not safe. Not because change is actually dangerous, but because the Nafs does not know the difference between the danger of transformation and the danger of actual threat. To the Nafs, uncertainty is the enemy. Discomfort is the signal to retreat. And the version of you that you are trying to become, that disciplined, spiritually present, consistently good version, that person is uncertain. That person requires you to enter territory your Nafs has never mapped. And unmapped territory, to the Nafs, feels exactly like threat. Or this is why you feel resistance the moment you try to change. Not laziness, not weakness, not some moral failure unique to you. Resistance. The Nafs pushing back with the full force of every protective instinct it has developed over a lifetime. And here is what makes it so precise, so difficult to see. The Nafs does not announce itself. It does not stand in front of you and say, I am going to stop you from changing because I am afraid of what change means. It is far more elegant than that. It works through you. It presents its interference as your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own reasonable conclusions. You wake up, and the first thing you feel is a heaviness that you interpret as tiredness, but is actually resistance. You sit down to pray, and something in your mind begins to generate a list of other urgent things that need your attention, and you interpret this as distraction, but it is actually interference. You make a plan, and within hours, you begin to feel a quiet but persistent doubt about whether the plan is realistic, whether the timing is right, whether maybe you should wait until you are more ready, and you interpret this as wisdom, but it is actually sabotage. The Nafs is a master of disguise, and perhaps its most powerful disguise is this: it makes comfort feel like peace. It makes avoidance feel like rest. It makes the choice to not change feel like a reasonable, considered decision rather than a retreat. You tell yourself you are being patient with yourself when you are actually being lenient with your Nafs. You tell yourself you are being realistic when you are actually being fearful. You tell yourself there is always tomorrow when your Nafs is actually just buying time. There was a man, and this is not a parable, this is a pattern I want you to recognize, who spent 3 years telling himself he would begin praying consistently when his life settled down, when the job situation was more stable, when the family situation was calmer, when he felt more spiritually ready, more mentally prepared, less distracted. 3 years. And what is interesting is that his life never actually stopped offering him reasons to wait. There was always something, a deadline, a difficulty, a season of stress. And when he finally sat with himself honestly, truly honestly, he realized that the instability was not preventing the prayer. The prayer was being prevented by something inside him that was using the instability as a justification. The circumstances were real, the difficulties were real, but they were not the cause. The cause was a Nafs that had learned long ago that spiritual discipline brought with it a kind of accountability that felt threatening. That to pray consistently was to stand before something that saw him completely. And that felt, to some deep, unexamined layer of himself, more frightening than the disorder of his current life. He was not avoiding prayer. He was avoiding being seen. This is the second layer, and most people never reach it. Most people stay on the surface, blaming their circumstances, their schedules, their lack of discipline, and never descend into the actual territory where the real conflict lives. Because reaching the second layer requires something the Nafs will do almost anything to prevent: honest self-examination, real, uncomfortable, unflinching honesty about what is actually happening inside. The Nafs does not want you to look too closely, because if you look closely enough, you will find it. And once you find it, once you actually see it operating, the way it generates excuses, the way it manufactures urgency to pull you away from stillness, the way it makes the lesser option feel like the more reasonable choice, it begins to lose its power over you. Not completely, not immediately, but something shifts. The invisible becomes visible, and what is visible can be addressed. So let me now describe something you have felt but never quite had language for. You know the feeling that arrives sometimes in the middle of an attempt at change, not at the beginning, when motivation is high, but somewhere in the middle, when the novelty has worn off, and what remains is the reality of sustained effort. A feeling that is not quite tiredness and not quite boredom, but something in between, a kind of flatness, a sense of going through motions, a quiet voice that says, "What is the point?" And you interpret this as evidence that you are doing the wrong thing, or that you are not cut out for this, or that maybe this particular path is not for you. It is not evidence of any of those things. It is the Nafs reaching for you at the moment you are most vulnerable to its pull, in the gap between initial enthusiasm and established habit. In that difficult middle space where the old self has been partially abandoned, but the new self has not yet been built. This is the most dangerous territory. This is where most transformations die, not because they were wrong or impossible, but because this is where the Nafs exerts maximum pressure, where it deploys the full weight of its accumulated defenses, where it says in 100 quiet ways, "Go back. It is safer there. You know who you are there." And most people go back, not because they are weak, because they are human, because the pull is real and the resistance is real, and nobody told them that this feeling, this particular feeling of flatness and doubt in the middle of attempting to change, is actually a sign that something real is happening, that the Nafs is fighting because it has something to protect. That the discomfort is not failure. It is progress, encountering resistance. And then there is another feeling, one that is harder to admit. The feeling that arrives after you get what you wanted, after you achieve the goal, after you maintain the discipline for a while, after you become for a brief period the version of yourself you were trying to become. And instead of the peace and satisfaction you expected, you feel something closer to emptiness, a slight hollowness, as if the attainment revealed that it was not quite the thing you thought it was. And you do not understand this, and it disturbs you, and sometimes it causes you to abandon what you built, precisely because you cannot reconcile the achievement with the absence of the feeling you expected it to bring. This is one of the most important signs of all, because that emptiness is not evidence that the goal was wrong. It is evidence that the goal was aimed at the wrong place, that what you were pursuing even when the pursuit looked good on the outside, even when it was genuinely productive, was still at some level aimed at the satisfaction of the nafs rather than the nourishment of something deeper. The nafs wants goals it can own, accomplishments it can point to, evidence of its own excellence, and when it gets them, it discovers, briefly, before the next desire replaces the current one, that none of it actually fills the thing inside that needed filling, because the nafs was never the part that needed filling. The scholars spoke of a hierarchy inside the human being that we have almost entirely forgotten how to navigate. At the surface, the nafs, restless, self-interested, protective, hungry. Beneath that, the qalb, the heart, not the organ, but the spiritual center, the seat of awareness, the place where your actual relationship with reality is processed. And beneath that, or perhaps more accurately at the core of everything, the ruh, the soul, the breath of God placed inside you, the part of you that is older than your history and quieter than your thoughts. Most of us live almost entirely at the level of the nafs, not because we are bad, because we were never taught otherwise, because the nafs is loud and the ruh is quiet, because the nafs speaks in the language of urgency and the ruh speaks in the language of stillness, because everything in the world around us, every notification, every noise, every demand, every distraction is calibrated to keep you engaged with the nafs and away from anything deeper. You have been trained to live on the surface. And when you try to change, when you make those promises to yourself, you are almost always making them at the level of the nafs, swapping one nafs-driven pattern for another, trying to replace one set of habits with another set of habits, never quite reaching the layer where the actual problem lives. This is why the changes do not hold. You are renovating the surface while the foundation remains untouched. Think about the last time you made a serious promise to yourself. I want you to think about the quality of that moment. Where were you? What had happened just before? In my experience, and this is consistent enough to be called a pattern, the moments when people make their most sincere resolutions tend to follow one of three things: a shock of some kind, a loss, or a rare, often late-night encounter with their own depth, a few minutes of unusual silence in which something they had been avoiding suddenly became briefly, painfully visible. These moments are real. The resolve that comes from them is real, but it tends to arise from the qalb, from the heart momentarily breaking through the noise. And then, when the noise returns, which it always does, the nafs reasserts itself, and the resolve quietly evaporates. Not because the heart was wrong about what it wanted, because the nafs controls the environment in which the heart has to operate. The nafs controls your attention, and whoever controls your attention controls your life. This is not metaphor. This is mechanics. When your alarm goes off at the time you set for yourself, the time you chose, the time you believed in when you set it, and you feel the pull to sleep a little longer, what is happening is not a simple contest between laziness and discipline. What is happening is that your nafs, which has spent years learning that the warmth of the bed means safety and the beginning of the day means demand, is flooding your system with every argument it has. The tiredness is real, but the tiredness is also being amplified by the nafs, which knows from long experience that if it can get you past that first moment, it has won the day, not because you are weak-willed. Ask because the Nafs has had years to practice this exact sequence, and you are attempting to interrupt a deeply embedded pattern with nothing but a resolution you made when you were in a temporarily different state. States change, and this is perhaps the most fundamental thing to understand about why your promises to yourself fail. You make the promise in one state. You attempt to keep it in another. The person who made the resolution felt the need for change with great urgency and clarity. But the person who wakes up to the alarm the next morning, or 3 days later, or 3 weeks later, does not feel that urgency. That person feels the ordinary pull of ordinary comfort. And without understanding that both of these are real experiences of the same human being, you will keep making the mistake of treating the promise as the solution, as if deciding something firmly enough once is sufficient to override the gravitational field of years of established behavior. It is not. The promise is the beginning of the work, not the work itself. And here is where I want to introduce something that the tradition understood with extraordinary precision, and that modern psychology is only beginning to catch up with. The transformation of the Nafs, and this is the actual phrase, the actual framework, Tazkiyah Nafs, the purification or refinement of the self, is not an event. It is a process. It is not something that happens because you want it badly enough. It is something that happens through sustained, patient, honest engagement with yourself over time. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not come with the feeling of resolution that you experience in those late-night moments of clarity. It comes quietly, the way understanding comes, gradually in pieces, and only to those who remain still enough to receive it. The Nafs, at its most primitive level, what the tradition calls the Nafs al-Amara, the commanding self, is in a state of complete self-service. It commands, it demands, it insists, it pursues its interests with no reference to anything above itself. Most people spend most of their lives in this state without ever realizing it, because the Nafs at this level is remarkably skilled at making its self-interest look like something else. It can make your desire for validation look like a desire to contribute. It can make your fear of accountability look like humility. It can make your avoidance of depth look like a preference for practicality. It is not malicious. It is simply what it is, a survival system optimizing relentlessly for its own comfort and continuation. The second level, Nafs al-Lawama, the self-reproaching soul, is what you feel when you break your own promises. That discomfort, that self-criticism, that awareness that you have fallen short of something you believed in. This is actually a sign of something alive in you. The capacity for self-reproach is not a problem. It is evidence of a conscience, evidence of a heart that has not completely surrendered to the Nafs. The pain you feel when you fail to become who you wanted to be, that pain is not something to be managed or suppressed or reasoned away. It is a signal. It is the Qalb pressing against the Nafs, all insisting on something higher. Most people mistake this signal for a verdict. They feel the self-reproach and hear it as, "You are a failure. You are hopeless. You will never change." And then, unable to bear the weight of that verdict, they either collapse into despair, or more commonly, they silence the reproach by returning to distraction, to comfort, to the numbing patterns of the Nafs. They cannot hold the discomfort long enough to hear what it is actually saying, which is something in you knows there is more. Something in you refuses to accept that this is all you're capable of. Something in you is still reaching. That something is not the Nafs. And this is the point where the conversation has to shift, because everything I have said so far has been about what is obstructing you. But obstruction is only the outer story. The inner story, the one that is harder to tell and harder to hear, is about what is calling you. You did not make those promises to yourself in a vacuum. Something motivated them. Something saw a gap between who you are and who you could be, and found that gap unbearable. That something is not ambition in the ordinary sense. It is not just a desire to perform better or feel better or be seen differently. It is something more primary than any of those. It is the ruh, the soul, experiencing the dissonance between the life being lived and the life that was intended. It is the oldest part of you recognizing that you are far from where you are supposed to be. And this recognition does not come loudly. It does not come as an announcement or a vision or a dramatic experience. It comes as a feeling you cannot explain, a restlessness without an object, a longing for something you cannot name, a sense that the life you're living, even when it is comfortable, even when it is successful by external measures, is somehow not quite real. This feeling is not depression. It is not anxiety. It is not a symptom to be treated. It is the Ruh speaking in the only language available to it in a being who has forgotten how to listen. The language of discomfort with distance. Distance from what? This is the question the Nafs does not want you to ask, because the answer to that question leads directly to the one territory the Nafs cannot follow you into. Genuine surrender. Not the performance of surrender, not the recitation of surrender. The actual, interior, deeply personal act of turning inward and acknowledging that you cannot solve yourself by yourself. That the will you keep trying to summon is not the final resource. That beneath the will, beneath the Nafs, and even beneath the heart, there is something that was given to you, not built by you, not earned by you, but given. And that what you have been calling a problem of discipline is actually a problem of orientation. The Nafs wants to face itself, to solve itself, to become better by its own effort in service of its own satisfaction. The Ruh knows it was made for something it cannot manufacture, and the entire struggle you experience, the promises made and broken, the resolutions that dissolve, the gap between who you are and who you know you could be, is the friction between these two orientations running simultaneously inside the same person. You are not confused. You are not broken. You are not uniquely flawed. You are a human being experiencing the most fundamental tension of the human condition. And understanding this, really understanding it, not as an idea, but as a felt recognition, changes everything about how you approach the work of becoming who you are trying to become. Because once you understand that the problem is not primarily a problem of discipline, you stop trying to solve it with more discipline. Once you understand that the resistance you feel is not a sign of personal weakness, but a sign of a deeply embedded survival system doing what it was designed to do, you stop treating yourself as the enemy and start treating the Nafs as the thing that needs to be understood, worked with, gradually redirected rather than simply overpowered, because you cannot overpower the Nafs with the Nafs. This is the mistake nearly everyone makes. They try to discipline themselves using the same self that needs disciplining. They try to will themselves into transformation using the same will that is compromised by the Nafs. It is like trying to see your own eye. The instrument of perception cannot perceive itself without assistance. The Nafs cannot reform the Nafs. What is needed is something above the Nafs, a reference point outside the system, a source of orientation that the Nafs did not create and cannot control. The tradition called this, in its most complete articulation, the turning of the heart toward the one who created the heart, not as a religious requirement imposed from outside, as a structural necessity arising from inside, as the logical conclusion of understanding what the human being actually is, a created thing, all containing within it a fragment of something uncreated, permanently disoriented until it finds its way back to its source. I am not asking you to simply believe this. I am inviting you to sit with your own experience and ask whether it is consistent with what you have observed about yourself. You have tried more than once to become better through pure intention, through motivation, through systems and schedules and willpower. You have had moments of genuine clarity and have watched them dissolve. You have felt the emptiness that follows achievement and the guilt that follows failure and the confusion that follows both. And in all of that accumulated experience of your own inner life, have you ever found a solution that worked entirely from within the Nafs? Have you ever motivated yourself into sustainable transformation? Have you ever planned your way into genuine peace? Or has every real shift you have experienced, every moment of actual growth, every period of genuine stability, every time you felt like the better version of yourself was not just an aspiration but a reality, come from somewhere that was not the Nafs, from a moment of stillness, from a prayer that you actually meant, from a period in your life when you were close to something larger than yourself? I think you already know the answer. The question is whether you are willing to let that knowledge do what it is trying to do. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that I want to name because it is extremely common and extremely misunderstood. It is the exhaustion of someone who has been fighting on the wrong front. You have been directing enormous energy toward changing your behavior, your habits, your patterns, your choices, while the thing beneath the behavior, the orientation that generates those patterns, has gone untouched. You are fighting symptoms while the root remains. And the root of the root, if you follow it far enough, is always the same, a heart that is divided, that is pulled in multiple directions simultaneously, that has never been given the chance to settle, to become still, to decide what it actually serves. The Qalb, the heart in the Islamic understanding, is not a passive receptacle. It is a dynamic, responsive, living reality that is shaped by what it is turned toward. Turn it consistently toward distraction, and it becomes distracted. Turn it consistently toward anxiety, and it becomes anxious. Turn it consistently toward self-comparison, toward social performance, toward the endless accumulation of validation from other created things, and it becomes fragmented, divided, unable to sustain anything because it is never actually whole. And a fragmented heart cannot maintain a transformation. It can initiate one in those moments of unusual clarity when some of the fragments briefly align, but it cannot sustain one because sustaining requires a stability the heart does not have when it is divided between 100 masters. This is the actual reason the promises do not hold, not lack of effort, not insufficient discipline, a fragmented heart attempting to sustain an undivided commitment. The work then, and I want to be precise about this because most people are looking for something more dramatic or more immediately actionable, something they can schedule and track and report progress on. The work is the work of unifying the heart, of reducing the number of things it serves, of gradually, patiently, through consistent daily practice, turning it away from the things that fragment it and toward the one thing that unifies it. This is why the Salah, the prayer 5 times a day at its appointed times, is not primarily a ritual requirement. It is a technology of heart unification. It is a structure specifically designed to interrupt the fragmentation, to return the heart 5 times daily before it can drift too far to a single point of orientation. The person who prays but treats it as a checklist to be completed is missing the mechanism entirely. The person who prays with presence, with genuine return, even imperfectly, even with 1,000 distractions along the way, is doing something to their heart that nothing else on earth is designed to do. They are practicing unification. They are practicing the withdrawal of attention from the 100 competing masters of the Nafs, and the brief, repeated daily offering of that attention to something that cannot be manipulated, cannot be appeased with performance, cannot be fooled by the Nafs, something that sees you completely. And perhaps this is the place to return to the man I described earlier, the one who was avoiding prayer not because he was lazy, but because he was afraid of being seen. Because the prayer, when it is real, does not let you perform. It does not care what you look like to others. It is the one place in human experience where the Nafs, with all its sophistication, all its ability to manage impressions and generate justifications, runs out of options. In the prayer, in genuine, present prayer, there is nowhere to hide. The heart is exposed, and what the heart contains is suddenly and uncomfortably visible to the heart itself. This is not comfortable. This is not supposed to be comfortable. Discomfort in the prayer is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. It is a sign that the prayer is doing what it is supposed to do, reaching past the performance layer, past the Nafs controlled surface, into the actual territory of the Qalb, and revealing what lives there. What lives there in most of us is a mixture of things we have not been honest about, fears we have managed rather than addressed, attachments we have justified rather than examined, longings we have buried under the noise of constant activity because looking at them directly would require admitting something about ourselves that we are not yet ready to admit. The prayer, when it is real, surfaces all of this, not to punish you, to free you, because you cannot release what you cannot see, and you cannot change what you have not acknowledged, and you cannot heal the wound you keep covering with the bandage of distraction. And so, the man who avoided prayer, he was not protecting himself from something harmful. He was protecting the Nafs from something necessary. He was keeping himself from the one encounter that could have, over time, with patience and honesty and genuine return, begun to transform the thing in him that actually needed transforming. And this is the pattern. This is the shape of the problem that repeats itself across 1,000 variations in 1,000 lives. The thing you are avoiding is the thing you need. The silence you fill with noise is the silence that would heal you. The stillness you resist is the place where the fragmented heart begins to find its way back to something whole. I want to talk about something that is rarely addressed honestly in conversations about self-improvement, about becoming better, about the whole enterprise of the promise to yourself that eventually dissolves. It is the question of what you actually want, not what you want on the surface, not the stated goal. Wake up earlier, pray more consistently, stop wasting time, be more disciplined. Those are the things you want the Nafs to produce. But underneath those, there is something the whole effort is pointed toward, a feeling, a state of being, something you believe you will experience once you have achieved the transformation. And in most cases, if you go looking for it honestly, what you find is something like this. You want to feel at peace with yourself. You want to stop the internal noise. You want the gap between who you are and who you know you should be to close. You want to feel that your life has weight, has meaning, has a direction that makes sense. You want, in a word that the tradition used without embarrassment, contentment, inner stillness, sufficiency from within. The Arabic word is sakina, a tranquility, a settling, a coming to rest. And here is the thing about sakina that the Nafs fundamentally misunderstands. It cannot be achieved. It can only be received. It is not the product of self-improvement. It is not earned through discipline or accumulated through good habits. It is, as every serious tradition has understood, something that descends, something that happens to the heart when certain conditions are met, when the heart has been sufficiently cleared of what was blocking it, when it's turned toward what it was made to be turned toward, when the Nafs has been not defeated, but gradually, honestly, patiently redirected. You cannot discipline yourself into sakina. You can only prepare the ground for it to settle. This is why the promises keep dissolving, because they are aimed at achieving through effort what can only arrive through orientation. You are trying to generate from within yourself something that was never inside you to begin with, or rather, it is inside you, in the ruh, in the divine breath that was placed there. But it cannot be manufactured by the Nafs, only recognized by the Qalb, only received when the heart has been turned toward its source. And so the work, the actual work, the work that is deeper than habits and schedules and accountability systems, is not primarily the work of doing better. It is the work of seeing more clearly. It is the work of becoming honest about the inner architecture of your actual life. It is the work of beginning to notice, with patience, without judgment, with the kind of gentle, sustained attention that the Nafs finds almost unbearable, what you are actually serving, what you are actually afraid of, what you are actually avoiding, what the noise is actually for, what the busyness is actually protecting. What you would find if you sat in genuine silence long enough to hear something beyond the monologue of the Nafs. This is not comfortable work. It is the most important work. And here is what I want you to understand about the promises you have made to yourself, not as consolation, but as clarity. The fact that you keep making them is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of something alive in you that refuses to accept the lesser version of itself. Every time you sit in that late-night clarity and feel the resolve rising, something real is happening. The ruh is pressing against the Nafs. The heart, despite everything, is still reaching. The part of you that was made for something better is still insisting, quietly, persistently, in those rare moments when the noise is briefly reduced, that you are capable of more. The problem is not the reaching. The problem is the approach. You have been trying to fly by, jumping harder, instead of understanding what wings are for. And so let me offer not advice. I promised you I would not give advice, and I will keep that promise, but a reorientation, a shift in how you look at what is happening inside you. When you feel resistance to the good you were trying to do not treat it as an obstacle. Treat it as information. What is the Nafs protecting? What does it believe it will lose if you change? What is the comfort it is trying to preserve? Sit with these questions, not to analyze them intellectually, to feel into them honestly. Because the Nafs, when it is seen clearly and without judgment, begins to lose its grip. Not through confrontation, through illumination. When you feel the emptiness after getting what you wanted, do not interpret it as evidence that the goal was wrong. Interpret it as a compass reading. The emptiness is telling you the direction of actual nourishment. What did you expect to feel that you did not feel? What were you hoping the achievement would provide? That hoped-for provision, trace it back to its source, and you will find the actual lack. And the actual lack is almost always the same. The heart that has been turned away from the only thing that can truly nourish it. When you feel the self-reproach after breaking a promise, do not silence it and do not drown in it. Hold it. Let it be what it is, the voice of the heart that has not given up on you. And rather than converting it into guilt, which is a Nafs level response, because guilt turns inward and feeds on itself, let it convert into return, not dramatic, not performative return, quiet, simple, sincere return. The salah that you missed, offer it now, not to compensate, not to balance the ledger, but because the heart that is returning needs something to return to, and the act of turning physically towards something greater than the Nafs has an effect on the inner architecture that no amount of intention alone can replicate. You are not trying to become a different person. You are trying to become more of who you actually are, beneath everything the Nafs has constructed over the years. The Ruh has not changed. It is the same as it was when you were a child, before the Nafs had built all its elaborate defenses, before the world had taught you all its lessons about the necessity of performance and self-protection and the wisdom of avoidance. The Ruh does not age. It does not accumulate cynicism. It does not learn to lower its expectations. It remains quiet and constant, carrying within it the original orientation, the fitra, the natural disposition toward the true and the good and the real, waiting for the Nafs to exhaust itself enough or be understood clearly enough that there is room for something else. And this is the hope that I want to end with. Not the hope of motivation, that bright, temporary flare that the Nafs loves and cannot sustain. The hope of architecture, the hope of someone who understands the system and knows that the system can be worked with. Who knows that the Nafs, for all its sophistication, is not the final word on who you are? Who knows that the Qalb, even when it is divided and distracted and scattered across 100 competing concerns, retains the capacity for unification? Who knows that the Ruh, silent, present, patient, has not abandoned you and has no intention of doing so? You are not beyond change. You are not too late. You are not uniquely broken. You are a human being at a particular point in the oldest and most important journey. The journey from the surface of yourself to the center, from the noise to the stillness, from the Nafs that commands to the heart that is at peace. And every promise you made to yourself, even the ones that dissolved, was a step in that journey, not a failure, a step. A moment when something in you was awake and reaching, and the fact that you are here now, still listening, still asking the question, still unwilling to accept the lesser version of yourself as the final answer. That is not nothing. That is everything. Because the journey does not begin with transformation. The journey begins with a person alone, somewhere late, feeling something they cannot explain, asking a question they do not have words for, and refusing to go back to sleep. Something in you is still awake. That is where it begins. Not with the promise, with the waking. You thought the problem was that you kept failing to change. But the problem was never the failing. The problem was that you were trying to change the wrong thing, from the wrong level, with the wrong instrument. You were using the Nafs to fix the Nafs. You were using willpower that the Nafs generates to overcome patterns that the Nafs enforces, and then wondering why the change would not hold. It is like asking a locked door to unlock itself. The key is not inside the lock. And now that you understand this, now that you can feel the architecture of what has been happening inside you, you can begin to work with it differently, not harder, differently, with more honesty and less performance, with more stillness and less urgency, with a patience that is not the Nafs pretending to be content, but the genuine, difficult, earned patience of someone who understands that transformation at the level of the Qalb does not happen in a week or a month or even a year, but happens slowly, quietly, through the accumulation of thousands of small, sincere moments, moments of return, moments of honesty, moments of genuine presence in the prayer, moments of choosing depth over distraction, at moments of sitting with the discomfort long enough to hear what it is saying. Every one of those moments is a contribution to the process. None of them is wasted, even the ones that feel like failure, because the Nafs al-Lawama, the reproaching self, the conscience, the part of you that feels the gap and cannot be comfortable with it. That reproach is not your enemy. It is your ally. It is the evidence that something in you is still holding the standard, still refusing to lower the expectation all the way to the level of the Nafs, still insisting, despite everything, that you are made for more than this, and you are. Not more than this in the sense of achievement, not more than this in the sense of performance or status or the accumulation of visible success. More than this in the sense that the word itself implies something more real, more present, more at rest, more genuinely alive than what you experience when the Nafs is running the show. A life that actually feels like a life, a self that actually feels like a self, a heart that is not perpetually divided but is gradually, painstakingly, with setbacks and silences and sincere returns, finding its way to the stillness it was designed for. You promised yourself you would be better. And the promise was real. It was just aimed slightly wrong. Not better at managing yourself, better at understanding yourself, not better at controlling the Nafs, better at seeing it, not better at keeping the rules, better at reaching the place where the rules are no longer a cage but a path. And the path is not something imposed on you from outside, but something you recognize from inside, because it points in the direction the Ruh has been pointing all along, the direction of home. And you know the feeling I'm talking about. You have felt it briefly, unexpectedly, in rare moments you probably could not predict or explain, in the middle of a prayer that somehow became real, in a moment of genuine generosity that surprised you, in a period of simplicity when the noise was reduced and something underneath became briefly audible, in the presence of someone whose heart was evidently at rest, and you felt, in their presence, the shape of what you were missing. That shape is not absent from your life, how it is buried under the accumulated weight of what the Nafs has built. And everything I have described on the Nafs and its mechanisms, the Qalb and its fragmentation, the Ruh and its quiet insistence, is not meant to overwhelm you with complexity. It is meant to show you that what you are dealing with is understandable, that there is a map, that other human beings have navigated this territory before you and have written in books that deserve to be read slowly and seriously what they found there, that the confusion you feel is not evidence of your uniqueness as a troubled person, but evidence of your participation in the most universal of human experiences. The experience of being a self that knows it could be more, surrounded by forces that make being more difficult, carrying within it something that will not stop insisting that the effort is worth making. You are not behind. You are exactly where this journey requires you to be, at the beginning. Again and again is not failure. Again is the mechanism. The Nafs will resist. The heart will be distracted. The promises will be imperfect. The days will not all look like the best version of what you are capable of. There will be mornings when the alarm is ignored, and evenings when the prayer is delayed, and weeks when the clarity of that late-night resolution seems like something that belonged to a different person in a different life. None of that is the end of the story. The story does not end with the falling. It continues with the rising, and the rising, quiet, sincere, without drama, and without the Nafs performing its recovery for an imagined audience. The rising is what the journey is actually made of, not the heights, not the moments of exceptional clarity, the ordinary, faithful, imperfect rising again and again and again from whatever the last fall was in the direction of something that does not move, that does not change, that was there before you started and will be there after everything the Nafs has constructed has fallen away. This is not a story of becoming someone else. This is a story of finding your way back to who you have always been, beneath everything. The Ruh knows the way. The question is whether you are willing to be quiet enough, long enough, honest enough to let it lead. And I genuinely think, that if you have stayed with this until now, if something in this has landed with the weight of recognition rather than the lightness of novelty, if you feel in this moment not motivated, but seen, then you are already quieter than you were before you started reading. And that is not nothing. That is, in fact, the beginning of everything. The Nafs wanted you distracted. You chose stillness, even for this long, even imperfectly. That is the choice that matters. That is the seed of the change you keep promising yourself. Not the dramatic resolution, not the perfect plan, not the ideal conditions you keep waiting for. This, right now, the choice to be still and honest and present and genuinely asking. Make that choice again tomorrow and the day after. Not perfectly, faithfully, and watch what happens to the heart. Watch what happens to the Nafs. When it is seen clearly and worked with patiently. Watch what happens to the life. When the heart begins, slowly, with setbacks, with the grace of every sincere return, to unify. You promised yourself you would be better. You will be. not because you finally found the right system, because you finally understood what the work actually is, and now you cannot unknow it. That is what just happened. That is what changed, not your habits, your understanding, and understanding when it is real, when it reaches the level of genuine recognition rather than staying at the level of interesting information, is the one thing the Nafs cannot entirely undo. You understand now. Begin there.